It was a Friday evening. I was home. My wife called earlier and said she'd have to stay late at work. The next call didn't surprise me. She said what she had to say. I said, no, not just no, but hell no. There's a diamond cab waiting at parking spot 127. You've got 30 minutes to be home. The drive from your office takes 25. If you're late, tell the driver to take you to your mom's. She didn't say a word while I talked, just a loud sigh before hanging up. I dropped the phone back on the hook and turned off my cell. I sat in my favorite chair, tried to read, but couldn't focus. 29.5 minutes later, I got up to lock the front door and slide the chain on. As I reached for the handle, a taxi slowly rolled up the driveway. She jumped out, yelling at the driver, something about how she could have walked faster. I walked over, handed the guy a $25 tip, and we both smiled as he drove off. She rushed inside, slammed the door, locked it, and hooked the chain from her side. I sat back down in the porch rocker and pulled a cold beer from the cooler beside me. When the beer was gone and she still hadn't come out, I climbed into my work truck, turned on the CD player, and reclined the seat a little. The windows cracked open just enough to let the night air in. Let me introduce myself. My name's George Root. The G is silent, so friends call me Grood. My wife, Terry, hates it when anyone calls her Trout. Says it sounds stupid. Whatever. I'm a master plumber. She's a secretary at a small accounting office. The next morning, she found me asleep in the truck. Said she'd been looking for me for 45 minutes. Strangely, she was still wearing the same clothes she came home in last night. Maybe that had something to do with the fact that the bedroom door was locked, and her clothes were packed in trash bags, locked in my truck bed. I listened to her screaming for a while. When she stopped and saw the grin on my face, I asked if she'd finally run out of shame. She opened her mouth to answer, then noticed a few neighbors watching from their porches. I just smiled, reached into the cooler for another drink, but changed my mind and grabbed a Diet Coke instead. No need to slow down the brain cells. While I drank, the bagpipes started playing Flower of Scotland through the truck speakers. I turned up the volume. I love bagpipes. She went back inside, forgot to close the door. When the song ended, I followed her in, shut the door, and ignored her sitting at the far end of the couch. I headed to the kitchen for a box of donuts I'd left from the night before. She hates donuts. One of the paramedics turned pale the moment he stepped inside, then hurried to help the injured. The police did their job quickly. The man by the door wasn't badly hurt. They cuffed him and took him away. I got a lecture about taking justice into my own hands, though every officer in that room made sure to keep their distance from loot. Neither of us was charged. When it was all over, I drove home to change into something clean before heading to the hospital to see Terry. A few minutes after we got home, the doorbell rang. It was the pizza I'd ordered for Loot. Small, double cheese, double beef, and green peppers. He was in heaven. When I arrived at the hospital, Terry was already awake and asking for me. She didn't have serious injuries, just sore muscles, a mild concussion, and a badly bruised jaw. They decided to keep her for observation for 36 hours. The men who helped James were all charged and convicted. Each got between 15 and 30 years. James was buried quietly in his hometown. His wife didn't even show up. Luke became an honorary state patrol dog. Before that day, Terry hadn't allowed him inside the house. She'd always been afraid of him. But after everything that happened, he earned her trust. He even got his own room, a 4-poster bed and all. The only time he was away from her was when he rode with me in the truck for work. Later, we found him a partner, a big, goofy girl just as oversized and ugly as he was. She had her first litter soon after. It took time, but Terry recovered body and mind. She eventually moved back into our bedroom, and we rebuilt what was broken. Clapperboard 25 years later. 25 years passed. My old boss retired and sold me the plumbing business for a fair price and a small share of future profits. Terry and I had 6 kids, 4 boys and 2 girls. The boys all took after me, big and loud. The girls looked like their mom, except both of them grew to nearly 6 feet tall. Lute lived 12 years. His partner passed away soon after, too lonely without him. We could see it in her eyes. Now, through careful breeding and training, we got 4 of Lute's grandpups and one of his sons at home. Just as big, just as ugly, just as loving. The boys are named Tiny and Junior, the girls Minnie and Petunia. Every truck in our company has Lute's face painted on the side. We renamed the business Plumber's Best Friend. The business is thriving. Terry and I are best friends. Still in love, still together. I keep those old padlocks in the garage. She knows they're there. And that's enough. I pulled up at the far end of the building and parked in the shadows. Lute and I stepped out quietly and made our way toward the room. When I knocked, one of the men cracked the door open on the chain. I didn't wait. I kicked the door wide and stormed in. Lute followed close behind. My only command to him was simple: protect Terry. I moved toward the 2 men standing near the bed while Lute went for James. The room froze for half a second. Chaos, panic, shouting. Within moments, the fight was over. I made sure they couldn't hurt anyone again. Lute stayed between Terry and the men, keeping her safe until it was done. She was unconscious, lying across the bed. Her clothes were torn, and the room was a mess. I threw a blanket over her and heard sirens in the distance. Lute and I stepped back into the corner. Down, I whispered. He lay beside me, covering his eyes with his paws, calm and silent, smart dog. When the police burst in, they saw me with my hands raised and Lute lying still at my feet. One of the officers recognized us. He'd seen Lute in action before years ago. The look on his face said it all. I quickly explained. The woman on the bed, that's my wife. She was taken from her workplace this afternoon. I followed them here. Outside, witnesses had already called in a report about the kidnapping. Backup arrived fast. Terry started to wake up, frightened, confused, trying to fend herself from anyone who came close. Lute noticed and carefully approached the bed, stopping short. When she saw him, her fear broke. She reached for him, and he nuzzled her gently. The officers relaxed a little when they realized he wasn't a threat. When the ambulances arrived, they took Terry first. It was over, at least for that night. The truth comes out. She told me everything. And one more thing she didn't know I already had. James worked as a salesperson at a company owned by a good friend of mine. His boss, Roger, had been itching to get rid of him for years. James did just enough to get by. For years, he'd padded his expense reports, passing off fancy dinners as business meals. Nobody could prove the fraud until he started seeing Terry. Roger wanted hard proof that those dinners were legitimate business expenses. He demanded client contact details. If James couldn't produce them, he'd be fired, and his recent expense reports would be rejected. The company had already run call logs from the phones provided by the sales team. On top of that, Terry's phone had GPS tracking on it, so I could check a location anytime. That's how I knew where she went on each of her dates with James. The taxi driver? He was the son of my best friend, Paul. He was usually free nights and was 19 now. He'd been a kid at our wedding 6 years earlier. He'd grown a beard and looked a lot older. On Monday, Roger called James into his office and gave him 24 hours to justify that his last expense report was business-related. When James couldn't prove that 3 of those meals were business meetings, they canned him. He took it badly. He'd already been bitter over being dumped by Terry when he thought he had a shot with her. I figured I'd keep an eye on her for a while, see what she was up to. I finished work an hour before her most nights, so it wasn't hard. Loot liked rides, so I'd take him along and tell her we were just going for a drive and a walk in the park, which we did. One evening, as she was leaving for work, James grabbed her and shoved her into his car. I was nearby and followed him in mine. Terry fought like crazy, scratching, clawing, hitting him until he struck her in the face, and she went out cold. James drove south. The far side of town has only one motel, the kind of dirty, disgusting hole you imagine. I already had friends who checked every one of the 3 motels in that area and kept an eye on his house. I called Paul and told him which car to watch. I followed at a distance. I watched them pull into the parking lot and park at a room. 3 of the guys got out and helped carry Terry inside. I ran past Paul and told him to call the police. I decided to wait. For now, she saw the locks and said there was no need to chain anything up. When she didn't come down for a while, I locked the truck and went out back to check on Loot. Loot's my dog, a Mastiff/Irish Wolfhound mix. To be honest, he was huge and kind of ugly in the best way possible. I wasn't small either, about 260 pounds, around 118 kilograms, and 6'8". In photos next to me, he somehow looked almost normal-sized. He was my baby, the sweetest dog you'd ever meet, as long as nobody messed with me in my house or my truck. I'd seen what he did to a guy who decided my tools looked more useful on him than on me. When Loot was done, the man begged the cops to take him away. The guy's skin wasn't even scratched. Worst thing Loot did was fart his face while sitting on him. He stayed like that until I called him off after the police came. The cops laughed at the thief and took him away. Loot and I went through guard dog school together. He was trained to wait until something left my truck and then hit fast. After a bit, the back door slammed, and Terry came into the yard looking for me. She started to yell, then froze when a low, threatening growl came from behind her. She didn't make a sound. Loot lay down at my feet and went to sleep again. She asked me quietly and politely to unlock the truck so she could finish hauling her things inside. I unlocked it. While she carried the first bag in, I dumped the rest out on the lawn. The sprinklers were set to come on in 5 minutes. I called to Terry and told her everything in the truck was out. She scrambled to grab her stuff before anyone could take it. When she lifted the second-to-last bag, the sprinklers kicked on. She grabbed the last bag and tried to run, but she got soaked anyway. I smiled and patted Loot. Later, as she smoothed the creases in her work clothes, her phone rang. I could hear her talking loudly, apologizing for leaving a restaurant without saying goodbye, saying something about how I'd somehow found out and told her to come home right away. She told him it was a mistake, and they couldn't see each other anymore. The voice on the other end got louder and more insistent. She said goodbye and hung up, and he called right back. She turned her phone off. Maybe now's a good time to explain something. 6 years ago, on our honeymoon, we went to a magic show. An opening act was a hypnotist. He brought Terry and 3 other women on stage, hypnotized them, and made them do silly stuff. When he was done, he returned her to the audience and whispered a magic phrase in my ear, something that would put her back under control later. He told me no one else could control her unless he allowed it. When he woke her, the first thing she said was, "I told you, you can't hypnotize me." The crowd went wild. That night, I hypnotized her again on purpose. I told her she would never let anyone touch her intimately without my permission. I didn't use hypnosis again for a long time after that. It took me a while to remember the exact phrase. But the night she called and started staying late on Fridays, the commands worked. I got suspicious about her sudden need to stay late at work, so I sedated her lightly and asked where she'd been and what she'd been doing. Saturday morning, the talk. I sat at the table, waiting for her to come in and maybe eat a couple of the donuts. When she finally walked in, I offered her one. If looks could kill, she would have buried me right there. She sat down, said nothing. I tilted my head, grinning. My dog would have been proud of me. I'd done everything perfectly. Finally, she spoke. How did you know where I was last night? You told me. I said. Her face froze, priceless. I never said anything about that. Would you believe me if I told you that you talk in your sleep? I leaned back. I know that was your fourth meeting with James. The first time you just held hands. The second, he had his hand on your leg. The last time, you kissed him in the parking lot for over 12 minutes before driving home. Want me to keep going? No, she whispered. I still don't even know why I did it. I don't understand why I called and asked if I could spend the night with him. Well, I said, if that's really what you wanted, go ahead. File for divorce. Have the time of your life. In that moment, I thought I wanted it, she said quietly. Looking back, I was a fool. I love you too much to have done that. I don't want a divorce. We talked for about an hour. She kept saying she didn't know why she went on those dates, that she only loved me and wanted to stay my wife for the rest of her life. I told her I still loved her too, but the trust was broken, and it would take time before I could even want to trust again. Then she asked if she could go to the bedroom, take a bath, and change clothes. I asked, where'd you sleep last night? In the guest room, she said. Well, I said, I'm about to go unlock the truck bed. Remember that? The truck where I slept last night? You can grab your things from there and move them into the guest room. That's where you'll be staying for a while. She stared at me like I'd started speaking Greek. If that truck bed isn't empty by the time I leave for work Monday morning, I said, I'll swing by your mom's place or Goodwill and drop it all off myself. And don't make a mess of my truck. I'm not sleeping in that room, she snapped. I'm your wife. I cut her off. You're real close to being my ex-wife. You'll stay in the guest room, or I'll drive to your mom's and unload everything right in her front yard. Then I'll knock on the door and tell her exactly why it's there. By the time I finished, I was shouting, not from anger, but to make my point. She started crying. Save the tears, I said. They won't fix anything. I ate 2 more donuts before she finally calmed down enough to speak again. She asked me to unlock the truck so she could bring her things inside. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the set of locks in front of me, thinking about whether I should let her have them back, now or later.